My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 39 years old. And last year, I did something I never thought I'd do. I signed the papers that ended my marriage. I still remember that day, as if it happened yesterday. The small office smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. My soon-to-be ex-husband Daniel sat across from me, silent, staring at the floor. The lawyer's voice was calm, distant, almost cold. As she read through the last page of the agreement, I tried to listen, but my mind was somewhere else. Somewhere between our first date and our last fight. When Daniel picked up the pen and signed his name, I felt my heart sink, and when it was my turn, my hand trembled so badly that the letters of my name looked broken. That single signature ended 15 years of shared life, love, laughter, and pain. We walked out of that office without saying a word. He went left, I went right. The street outside was busy, but to me, the world felt silent. It was the end, not just of a marriage, but of the person I used to be. Daniel wasn't always the man I divorced. When I met him, he was kind, patient, and full of dreams. He made me laugh in ways no one else could. Back then, he worked long hours as an engineer, always talking about the future we'd build. A little house, maybe 2 children, a garden full of roses, and for a while, we had it all. We did have 2 children, Ethan and Lily. Ethan's 17 now, tall and thoughtful. Lily's 14, bright-eyed and full of questions about everything. For years, our home was ordinary but happy. We argued, sure, but nothing serious. Then, something changed. It started small. Daniel began drinking after work. Just a glass to relax, he said. At first, I believed him. He worked hard. He deserved it. But 1 glass became 2, 2 became 3, and soon, every night blurred into the same dull haze of beer bottles and silence. I told myself it was temporary, that he was stressed, that it would pass, but it didn't. He started losing focus at work, missing days, coming home later and later. Then came the shouting, the cruel words, the broken promises. He wasn't the same man I married. Sometimes I looked at him and couldn't even recognize his face. The warmth in his eyes had turned to something dark, something distant. I tried everything. I begged him to stop, to think of the kids. I suggested therapy, support groups, anything. He always said the same thing. I'm fine, Claire. You're the one overreacting. But I wasn't fine. None of us were. The nights became unbearable. Ethan started spending more time at his friend's house. Lily stayed quiet at the dinner table, pretending not to hear her father's angry voice from the next room. I remember once, Ethan looked at me with tears in his eyes and asked, "Mum, why don't we just leave?" I had no answer. I was too scared. I kept hoping Daniel would change, that the man I loved was still somewhere inside him. But hope can be cruel when it keeps you trapped. The final straw came one night when he came home drunk, angrier than usual. The kids were in their rooms, but they could hear everything. He shouted about money, about me, about everything that had gone wrong in his life. Then he threw a chair across the kitchen. Can still hear it crash against the wall. I remember the sound of Lily crying softly in her room. That was the moment I knew, if I stayed, something worse would happen. The next morning I called Emma, my closest friend. She had gone through a divorce years ago. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she just said quietly, "Claire, it's time to save yourself." Her words gave me courage. A week later, I found a lawyer. Filling out those forms felt like tearing apart the last pages of a book I once loved. But I had to do it. For my children, for myself. Daniel didn't take it well. He said I was selfish, heartless, that I was breaking the family. But deep down, I knew the truth. The family had already been broken for years. The months that followed were painful. Meetings, documents, endless emotions. Ethan stopped talking to his father. Lily cried some nights, asking if we'd ever be together again. Each time I held her and said, "It's going to be okay," even when I didn't believe it myself. When the divorce was finally official, I walked out of that office with tears in my eyes. But for the first time, I also felt something else: freedom. I had lost a husband, yes, but I had also lost years of fear, shame, and silence. And for the first time in a long time, I could finally breathe. The first weeks after the divorce felt strange, like walking through fog. Every sound in the house was sharper, every silence louder. I would wake up and instinctively listen for Daniel's voice. The clink of bottles, the tension in the air. But all I heard now was quiet, peaceful, yet almost too quiet. For the first few mornings, I sat at the kitchen table with my tea, watching sunlight fall through the window onto the same chair he used to sit in. There was no shouting, no anger, no smell of alcohol. Just space, empty space. Freedom and loneliness, I learned, can look exactly the same. Ethan and Lily tried to act normal. They still joked, still argued over the remote, but I could see the relief in their eyes, like a heavy weight had been lifted from their small shoulders. Ethan got a weekend job at a car repair garage. He came home smelling of oil and sweat, proud of the money he'd earned himself. Lily joined a small dance club after school. When she smiled again, a real smile, I felt something heal inside me. For so long, our home had been filled with fear. Now it was starting to fill with laughter again, even if only in small moments. I wanted to believe life could be normal again, but healing isn't a straight line. Some nights, I still cried, not because I missed Daniel, but because I missed the version of myself that had believed in forever. One evening, Emma, the same friend who had told me to leave, called and invited me to a meeting at the local community center. It was a small group for women who had gone through divorce or loss. At first, I didn't want to go. I was tired of telling my story, tired of crying in front of strangers. But Emma said softly, "Sometimes you need to hear someone else say the words you're afraid to speak." So I went. The first time I walked into that room, my heart raced. 10 women sat in a circle, holding mugs of tea. Some smiled when I came in. Some looked down, lost in their thoughts. A woman named Margaret, who ran the group, greeted me warmly and said, "You're safe here, love. We all know what it's like." I sat down, not knowing what to expect, as each woman shared her story. Broken marriages, betrayals, loneliness. I felt something shift inside me. Their pain was different, yet somehow the same as mine. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled. But once I started, I couldn't stop. Everything I had held inside came out. The nights of fear, the shouting, the silence, the shame. No one interrupted me. They just listened. And when I finished, one woman reached over and squeezed my hand. She whispered, "You did the right thing." That simple touch broke something open in me. I cried, but it wasn't the same kind of crying as before. This time it felt lighter. It felt like release. Over the following weeks, I kept attending those meetings. They became my small sanctuary. Every Thursday evening, I'd sit with those women, drink tea, and talk. Sometimes we shared our sadness. Sometimes we laughed until tears rolled down our faces. Each story reminded me that pain didn't make us weak. It made us human. Margaret once told us, "Divorce is not the end of love. It's just the end of loving the wrong person for too long." Her words stayed with me. Outside of the meetings, life slowly took shape again. I focused on my work, spent time with the children, and started doing things I hadn't done in years. Small things like reading before bed or going for morning walks. One Saturday, Emma and I went to the local market. We bought flowers, fresh bread, and sat by the fountain watching people pass by. She said, "You're starting to look like yourself again, Claire." I smiled, not sure if I believed her yet, but deep down, I knew she was right. A piece of me was returning. At home, Ethan often helped me with small repairs around the house. Once, when he fixed the leaky tap, I thanked him and he said, "It's okay, Mum. You fixed enough for all of us." His words hit me quietly, but deeply. Maybe I had. Still, there were difficult days. Nights when the loneliness crept in like a slow fog. I'd sit by the window with a blanket, watching couples walk past on the street, holding hands, laughing softly. Part of me longed for that again. Not Daniel, never him, but the feeling of being loved, of belonging. Yet another part of me whispered, "Not yet. Not until you find peace with yourself first." That became my quiet promise, to rebuild myself before I let anyone else in again. By the end of that winter, I started noticing small changes. I was sleeping better. I was laughing more. The house didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a home. One night, Lily hugged me before bed and said, "Mom, you don't cry at night anymore." I looked at her, surprised. "Did you used to hear me?" I asked. She nodded. "Sometimes. But now you laugh in your sleep." I couldn't hold back the tears then. Not the sad ones, but the kind that come when you realize you've finally stepped out of the storm. Spring arrived gently that year. The mornings were softer. The air smelled of rain and new beginnings. Sometimes, when I opened the curtains, sunlight would spill into the living room. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like the light was too bright for me. It felt right. It felt like life was quietly saying, "You've made it this far. Keep going." I began to fill my days with small, deliberate things. A walk around the park before work, a book before bed, fresh flowers on the kitchen table every Sunday. Simple things, but each one reminded me that I was still alive, still capable of joy. Ethan and Lily noticed it too. They said the house felt lighter, warmer. Ethan teased me one morning, saying, "Mom, you're turning into one of those people who talk to plants." I laughed, and it struck me how long it had been since laughter felt natural in this home. One Thursday at the support group, a new woman joined us. Her name was Sophie, and she looked younger than me, maybe mid-30s. Her eyes were tired. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Her husband had left her for someone else, and she was now raising 2 children on her own. She said she couldn't sleep at night, that she cried in the kitchen when her kids were asleep. I saw myself in her. Every word she said felt like something I had whispered once to the walls of my own home. When she finished speaking, she wiped her eyes quickly and said, Sorry, I didn't mean to cry so much. I reached over, took her hand, and said softly, Never apologize for pain. You're allowed to feel it. You've survived something heavy. You should be proud of that. She looked at me, and for the first time that evening, she smiled. A small smile, but a real one. It reminded me of the day someone had done the same for me. That night, as I walked home under the streetlights, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just healing anymore. I was helping others heal too. And maybe that was the reason I had survived everything. So I could guide someone else out of the dark. The weeks rolled on, and the group became a second family. We laughed together, shared meals, and even planned small trips. Once we took a day off and drove to the seaside. The air was cool. The wind carried the scent of salt, and the sea stretched endlessly before us. We sat on the sand, eating sandwiches, our shoes off, our laughter loud. For a few hours, none of us were divorced women or single mothers. We were simply women, free, alive, and still standing. When I walked along the water's edge, I felt something shift in me again. Not sadness, not longing, but peace. For so many years, my life had revolved around saving someone else. Now I was learning to save myself. At home, things continued to settle. Ethan passed his driving test and started talking about moving out one day. The idea made me proud and nervous all at once. Lily was thriving at school, full of dreams about studying art. She often said, "Mum, you're my hero." Every time she said it, my heart ached and glowed at the same time. I hadn't been perfect. I'd been scared, tired, and broken. But maybe being a hero didn't mean never falling. Maybe it meant falling and standing up again anyway. That summer, Emma and I met at a small cafe near the park. She smiled at me across the table and said, "Look at you now, Claire. You're not the same woman who came to my door crying a year ago." I stirred my coffee and smiled. "I feel different," I said quietly. "I still have bad days, but I'm not scared of them anymore." She nodded. "That's how you know you've healed. Not when life becomes perfect, but when the pain stops controlling you." Her words stayed with me for weeks. Still, some nights were lonely. I'd look at the empty chair opposite mine at dinner and wonder if I'd ever let someone sit there again. Sometimes I missed the idea of having a partner, someone to share a quiet evening with, to talk about small things, like the weather or what to cook for Sunday lunch. But then I reminded myself, I didn't need to rush. I needed to know who I was, without someone beside me first. And slowly, that thought stopped sounding lonely. It started sounding strong. One evening as I closed the curtains, Lily came to me and said, "Mum, you smile more now. You even sing when you cook." I laughed. "Do I?" She nodded. "Yes. The house feels happy again." Her words touched me more deeply than she could have known, because in that moment, I realized something. The house hadn't changed. I had. And because of that, everything around me felt lighter. By the time autumn came, I knew this truth deep inside me. Healing isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about building something beautiful out of what's left. And I was doing that, one day at a time. A year passed, just like that, quietly, softly, without asking for permission. When I looked back, I could barely recognize the woman I once was. The sleepless nights, the empty silences, the fear of never feeling whole again. They had all faded into something gentler, not gone, but softened, like scars that no longer hurt when you touch them. It was a Sunday morning when I realized how far I'd come. The kettle whistled in the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the window. And for the first time in years, I caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't look away. There was no bitterness in my eyes, just peace, and maybe even a touch of pride. I wasn't the same woman who had begged someone to stay. I was someone who had learned how to stand alone and still be enough. That afternoon, I went for a walk in the park near my house. The same park where months ago I had cried quietly on a bench, thinking I'd never smile again. Now the trees were golden with autumn, their leaves falling like confetti over the grass. Children laughed, dogs ran freely, and the world seemed alive with quiet joy. I sat on that same bench and smiled at the memory of my first visit here. Back then, I had been lost. Now, I was found. Not by anyone else, but by myself. An old man was feeding pigeons nearby. He looked over and said, "You've got that look, the one people get when they've been through a storm." I smiled. "And how does that look?" He chuckled, like someone who knows the value of calm. His words stayed with me the whole walk home. One evening, I was invited to speak at the women's group that had once helped me heal. They wanted me to share my story, to tell others what healing really looks like. At first, I hesitated, but then I thought of Sophie and the woman I used to be. If my words could reach even one person lost in the dark, it would be worth it. When I stood in front of that small crowd, my hands trembled a little. I took a deep breath and began. I used to think strength meant holding everything together, keeping silent, pretending I was fine. But real strength, I've learned, is letting yourself break and still choosing to rise again. I spoke for almost an hour. I told them about the nights I couldn't sleep, the mornings I didn't want to get up, and the moments I thought I'd never recover. And then I told them about the first time I laughed again, the first time I felt the sun on my face without crying, and how beautiful it felt to simply breathe without pain. When I finished, the room was silent for a few seconds, and then filled with soft claps, tears, and nods. In that moment, I knew my pain had found its purpose. Weeks later, I decided to take a short trip on my own to the seaside, the same place we had gone with the group before. Only this time I went alone. I walked barefoot on the cold sand, the waves curling softly around my feet. The air smelled of salt and freedom. I stood there for a long time, watching the horizon blur into the sky, feeling the wind push against my face. There was no sadness this time, just peace and gratitude for every tear, every heartbreak, every beginning and ending that had brought me here. When I returned home that night, I found Lily waiting up for me. She had drawn something, a picture of the two of us standing by the ocean. At the bottom, she had written in her careful handwriting, "Me and Mum, stronger than before." I hugged her tightly, my throat aching with love. She looked up at me and whispered, "Are you happy now, Mum?" I smiled through my tears. "Yes, sweetheart, I think I finally am." That night, I stood by the window, watching the city lights blink softly in the distance. For so long, I had been afraid of the future, afraid of what came after loss. But now I knew the truth. The end of one story doesn't mean life stops. It simply changes direction. And sometimes, the new path, though uncertain, leads somewhere even more beautiful. I whispered softly to myself, "Here's to new beginnings." And as I turned off the lights, the night outside seemed a little brighter.